Well, today we are very lucky to have Amy Francetic. She is a serial entrepreneur and investor that started her career after Stanford in the high-tech industry and transitioned to work on clean energy and climate when she felt a calling to be more purpose-driven. An environmentalist, athlete, mother, and businesswoman, Amy will share her journey with Santa Cruz Works members here and answer questions about climate tech trends and opportunities. There are many companies focused on energy and climate solutions that may take decades to bring to market. Learn about companies who can have a short-term impact, that's within 10 years, by leveraging digital technologies to address climate risk. Many of them are local industries that are most affected by global warming. That includes agriculture, energy, transportation. Amy is managing director at Buoyant Ventures. So please welcome Amy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Doug, and for Santa Cruz Works for hosting me. I'm thrilled to be here and have such a great fondness for the Bay Area. I spent 20 years in the San Francisco Bay Area, including my time at Stanford. So I know that you all really appreciate your outdoors there, and I love what the organization is about as well. So I'll tell you all a little bit about an accelerator that I started here in Chicago. I'm calling in now from downtown Chicago. I'm in my office, not in my bathroom, as Doug thought before. This is my office in the downtown Chicago loop. I live in Lake Forest, Illinois, but I came downtown just to escape the ruckus of our household and to be able to talk with you all in a quiet setting. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm just going to run through a few slides for you all. Would really love to get into Q&A because that is always more fun to talk with folks in more of a conversational format. And let me get into the share screen. Here we go. Let's see. Okay. So so a little bit about me. I am one thing you need to know about me is that I love the outdoors. So the outdoors for me, nature is my medicine, is my therapy, and is throughout my life been a huge part of what has kept me healthy and happy. I took this picture when I was at Stanford of the Sierra Nevadas and was really into photography for a period of time. And I went to Stanford, and it's a perfect school for me because the mascot is the tree. And so I had a great experience there. I come back on a regular basis. And one of the things that really drew me to the university was how gorgeous and natural the setting was for the university. After Stanford, I set to work in the high-tech industry and worked at Electronic Arts early in my career, but ran my first startup. I'm working on my fourth startup now. My first startup was in the high-tech toy area, and it was a company called Zowie, and we were putting electronics in toys and connecting them to the computer. And this was long before, the Wii and the Xbox, and we were trying to create a very natural interface for kids to connect to the computer. And so we used these toys to control the video game experience. We ended up selling that company to Lego in the year 2000. And I took a little time off after that because it was exhausting to take a company from zero to exit. And I put my energy into working on these two little dumplings. So both my daughters were born at Stanford Hospital. This is Lucy and Sydney. They're now sophomores and seniors in high school. But these two were really part of what changed my whole outlook on life. My husband, Jason, and I were so thrilled when they came along, and I just felt really strongly after becoming a mom and also dealing with some health issues along the way that I really wanted to devote the rest of my career into doing something very purposeful that would make the world a better place for my girls and for their kids and grandkids. So I knew I loved the outdoors, and I knew I loved nature, and I was really concerned about what I was seeing happening around the world. The pollution levels that were really ruining the natural environment, and all of the ways that the energy sector was accelerating climate change and contributing to this this crisis that we have right now and has been happening for the last couple of decades. So I thought, what could I do to make a difference in this area? And I turned my business skills to working alongside scientists and engineers, which is a big theme throughout my career, to help come up with solutions to climate change. The second startup that I started was and is an organization called Clean Energy Trust. And a little bit like Santa Cruz Works, it is focused regionally. It's here in Chicago, and its purpose and mission is to help advance climate solutions throughout the Midwest. The problem we set about solving was that there was terrific research and entrepreneurs and innovation in the Midwest, but very little early stage capital. We weren't surrounded by the angel investors in the venture community in Silicon Valley. And there was very little early stage capital to help create businesses and to sustain them. And so I joined forces with Michael Polsky, who's the CEO of Invenergy, which is a very large renewable energy developer here in Chicago, and Nick Pritzker from the Pritzker family, and we started Clean Energy Trust. One of our success stories is this company, Luminade, who was created by two women who were University of Chicago MBA students. They happened to be in Japan during the Fukushima earthquake, and they saw how devastating it was to be in a disaster area with no light. Even though people were sending food and water and money, they weren't sending light. And so they created these solar-powered inflatable lanterns that pack flat and are inflated by breathing into them. And the lights last for 9 to 16 hours. And they send these in large quantities to disaster areas to help bring light to areas that are impacted after hurricanes, floods, earthquakes. And they went on Shark Tank and got a deal from Mark Cuban. And the company has been doing really, really well. And they're still here in Chicago making their products. And we're hoping that we'll have a successful exit with Luminade. But Clean Energy Trust, over the years, it's been 10 years now, has funded over 35 companies, and they've gone on to raise, I think we're almost up to $200 million in additional capital. And I now serve on the board. So I left, I'm chairman of the board, and I left Clean Energy Trust at the end of 2015 and created my third startup with Michael Polsky called Energize Ventures. Energize Ventures is a $165 million venture fund that invests in digital energy and industry solutions. A couple of examples of companies in the Energize portfolio, two that are in the Bay Area. This first one is Aurora Solar, started here by Chris and Sam, and they met each other at Stanford Business School, and they created a software system that helps installers of rooftop solar design a solar system from their desk. So they don't need to actually drive out to the house or the business, climb on the roof and take measurements the way that it's originally had been done. They can do all the design work from their desk, and that helps them to be able to send a proposal to a customer and help them make a decision quickly, and more importantly, helps them target the right customers, the customers that are likely to make a positive decision, but who will also gain the most from installing a system like that. So I served on the board of Aurora Solar, and their company is doing quite well now. And then another Bay Area company that we invested in is Volta Charging. It was started by this entrepreneur, Scott Mercer, and you guys have probably seen these charging stations around the Bay Area. Their innovation was really on the business model. So what they did was put big digital screens on the charging stations, installed them in high foot traffic areas like at malls, movie theaters, sports venues, and they offer the electricity for the electric car owners for free, and they make their money and pay for the electricity by selling ads on the chargers, and those ads are monetized by all the people that walk back and forth in and out of those locations. and see the ads there. And Chicago is one of their major cities as well, so they're all over Chicago as well. And that company is doing quite well as also. After Energized Ventures, I started, as Doug mentioned, my fourth startup, which is Buoyant Ventures. And we just launched in January. With the timing from an economy standpoint hasn't been a great time to launch a new fund, but we're hanging in there. We're completely determined to get this off the ground. And the purpose of Buoyant Ventures is to invest in digital climate solutions. So again, this theme of digital technologies that has been a theme throughout my career, but this time applied to companies that can help address climate risk in four main industry categories: in the energy, transportation, agriculture, and built environments. And these are technologies that can both help help those businesses adapt to climate change, but also help mitigate that and reduce their contributions to climate change. So reduce their emissions, reduce their waste. And these technologies are mostly software and some hardware. It has been really driven by innovation in the data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning categories, as well as the proliferation of low-cost sensors, as well as data storage that has happened over the last roughly decade. And now we can use all of that innovation to create solutions that can be adopted really quickly. These are not, what are typically called hard tech or hard science innovations. This isn't material science, battery chemistry, solar cells. Clean Energy Trust invests in a lot of those businesses, but Buoyant really is looking for more capital efficient, capital light solutions. We are also committed to impact. So we require that all of our portfolio companies contribute impact to at least one of these 9 UN Sustainable Development Goals. We also have a really strong commitment to diversity and inclusion. So 2 of the 3 Buoyant partners are women, and we require that all of our portfolio companies put in place a diversity inclusion plan for helping to make their boards and their staffs more diverse. And a lot of people ask, wow, what's happening with climate amidst COVID? What's going to happen, now that the economy is turned upside down and people's, lifestyles have been changed. And there's some positive things for sure, some negative things and some risks. But for the most part, I think a big helpful effect of COVID is that people around the world have seen the benefits of clean air and water as they have, as industry has been severely curtailed and pollution has been curtailed during this time. And it's a demonstration of what life could look like if we made some changes rapidly to help address climate change. And also that institutional investors that have had investments outside of the fossil fuel industry are going to have those investments perform better than fossil-related investments. And so we've seen a lot of institutional capital at big banks and private equity firms that have an ESG and environmental social governance requirement or a sustainability requirement. And those funds have been performing better than traditional energy funds, but especially as we have witnessed the collapse of pricing in the oil sector and this movement towards cleaner solutions is happening, we're going to see folks that have made these investments experience better returns. And then there's also been a really strong emphasis on digital transformation. So that's already been happening, but that's being accelerated. Like we're using now, Zoom and all these other ways to communicate digitally. A lot of old line industries are now making that digital transformation happen a lot quicker. And we're looking at more resiliency in operations and supply chains as a result of COVID. Certainly on the downside, the global pandemic is the emergency and the highest priority right now. So that does mean that other crises are, secondary to that, understandably. And some of those investments that are needed in infrastructure are being slowed down or deferred. And we're really watching carefully what happens with the presidential election. So we are hoping that there will be an administration change so that we can have political leadership in the United States get us back into the Paris Climate Accord, and also to help support growth in the clean energy industry, as well as to try to repair some of the damage that has happened with China, as that is also, they're a major company that we need to be cooperating with on these issues. So that's just the quick highlights on my career. I'm happy to answer any questions, and will do my best to respond thoughtfully to any questions that you all may have. But you know, I really hope that, you know, the little bit that I'm doing in my career can make a difference, and find some solutions that can be put in place to help preserve this amazing, you know, gift that we have, which is, you know, we're blessed in the world, but also especially in this country with so much wonderful open space, and you know, prior leaders that have preserved our national parks and all these other areas that we can enjoy. And I hope that I can do a little bit to make that better.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Amy. Really enjoyed your presentation. We have time now, of course, for Q&A. So attendees, if you have a question for Amy, please put them in the Q&A box, and hopefully we'll get to those. But first, Amy, are you ready for our lightning round pop quiz?
Sure, sure.
Okay, so we have 4 questions here. Go ahead, and you can answer as long or short as you want.
Okay.
It's an either or. So wind or solar? That's the first one.
Solar.
Solar. Okay, why?
Well, first of all, I mean, they're both amazing, right? We need both of them for sure. But I think the fact that solar can be installed in more locations and on rooftops is a really big advantage. The pricing is coming down even more, and I think can be installed around the world more broadly than wind power. So I wouldn't want to put one over the other for sure, but I do feel like there's a lot more upside in solar power just because of the flexibility, and where it can be deployed around the world.
Perfect. Okay, next one. Public transportation or electric cars?
Oh my God, that is a tough one. All right, so I typically take the train down to my office here and before COVID, and am a big fan of public transportation, but understand, of course, during COVID, so many people are nervous about it, including myself. So I did drive my Tesla downtown today. So I think in lieu of, I think public transportation is most important, certainly for most people, and is way more efficient than putting any number of cars on the road. But I think in lieu of that, or until we have a way to keep people safe and healthy on public transportation, then we have to support electric vehicles. And I'm thrilled to see so many new models coming out. And I really, really love my car. It has changed my relationship with driving. I just love to drive my car. So a really great electric car can be life-changing.
Good answer. Okay, next one. Elon or Jobs?
Gosh, these are all terrible choices to have to make.
Aren't they?
Oh my God, you're so rough. All right, so love him or hate him, you have to respect Elon Musk, right? He is just incredible. I just told you I'm, you know, a big fan of his for the car that I drive and what he's doing with SpaceX and everything else. But you know, I was in the Bay Area during Jobs' career and got to meet him, and one of my bosses worked for him at Apple, and just brilliant. I've used Mac products and iPhones my whole life. So I don't want to choose. I don't want to choose. I'm sorry. I can't choose. They're
Fair
both
enough. Fair enough. Okay, last one. Profits or extinction?
Wow. We cannot choose extinction. I mean, we can't choose that. I mean, I'm a big believer in, you know, profits that also have impact, right? So, so you're sort of suggesting with that choice, maybe along the lines of the degrowth movement that's happening around the world in some places and in Canada. But I really think that, you know, companies that have innovative solutions that are profitable and can work within our capital markets are the kinds of solutions that we really need to get behind. And we need to give them market signals to help them be successful. to help them scale up. So I definitely would have to choose profits.
Okay, great. You got 4 out of 4 correct. We'll send you your toaster in the mail. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get now to the questions. And again, we have quite a few questions already, but if you have a question, attendees, please put them in the Q&A. First question, it's from Bert. Sarah from Energy Foundry also saw interest in asset risk migration. Are you working on this together, Amy, or addressing different asset classes?
Let's see, asset risk migration.
No, mitigation.
Oh, mitigation. I'm sorry, that was my fault. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, asset risk mitigation. I am not working with her on that. I'd be more than happy to work with her on that. I think that it is in the case of, let me just get this here so I can see this on my screen a little better. Okay. When you're talking about assets, so assets can really mean two things here, right? It could be money and different classes of investment, but it can also mean physical assets. And what we're excited about is how you can use these models and machine learning and other technologies to understand the climate risk to physical assets for the most part. There is a direct connection to folks that have invested in that physical infrastructure. So folks that can translate physical asset risk into economic risk are really those are really the winning solutions, right? So it's not enough to say, okay, here's the flood maps and these locations are very likely to be flooded, or these coastal areas are going to be flooded by sea level rise. But you really have to be able to translate that physical infrastructure risk into economic dollars so that people can make better decisions about where to put their money, right? So if that's a municipal bond that is trying to raise money for an area, a school district, a hospital, a community that's going to be severely impacted by sea level rise, you'd want some rating or information on that bond to know that, wow, it's not going to be worth what they think it's going to be worth in the long run. But so I think we're very excited about anybody that can layer that economic value on top of the physical infrastructure risk. That's something that we're looking for in companies, and we're seeing a lot of great innovation in that area right now.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question from Dagmar. Do you think the U.S. environmental industries are at a disadvantage in comparison to other countries, example Europe, especially in the early stages, since other countries subsidize green energy much more than the U.S.?
Well, I think the disadvantage here is the lack of sort of coordinated, consistent policy. I think this, the benefits of, one, benefit of some of the early investments in clean energy, as well as the early subsidization that is now phasing out, frankly, is that it has helped to de-risk and to make more economically competitive clean energy solutions. So utility scale wind and solar is some of the cheapest new energy that you can build today. It's cheaper, it definitely is cheaper, produces cheaper energy than coal and nuclear, and is even cheaper than natural gas in some markets. So we are expecting that there will not be a lot more subsidization of those core technologies, and that you can build really successful innovation around that. So I don't necessarily think that the US is at a disadvantage. I think the issue is if we had more leadership, I think we could just go much, much faster. So, the industry has been asking for some kind of decisions on pollution controls, and certainly like rolling back, EPA rules and challenging those rules, knowing that that isn't even what the business community wants, and then expecting that that's going to have to be put back in place. And the next administration, this back and forth is just really unproductive, and the business community doesn't like that uncertainty and change. So I think if we had more consistency and longer term policies, I don't think it necessarily needs to be subsidization. I think it just needs to be consistency. And we have, always been great at innovating around market signals, and a lot of the technologies that are being deployed around the world have grown out of the labs and universities here in the United States.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Craig. How do we avoid greenwashing? How do we measure and validate the ESG metric of companies we invest in.
Yeah, there's a lot of neat young companies that are coming up with solutions for this. So both, trying to really translate the carbon footprint and sustainability effects of these businesses, throughout their entire supply chain. So I've been looking at a number of companies that are trying to measure that in the supply chain itself. And I think that's really, really important. It can't just be in your operations as a company. It really needs to be with all of your vendors and suppliers as well. So there are a lot of folks that are using their awesome, artificial intelligence and data analytics to make those measurements and to create some standardization around that. So we're going to be able to do some apples to apples comparisons coming very, very soon. And I know that a lot of these corporations that have made these commitments are also looking to third parties to help do independently verified measurements, so that it's not just them saying it, but that they are turning to some of these third parties. So I think that that's going to become a little bit more obvious. I know that one of the areas that maybe you are thinking about, Craig, is also in the oil and gas. When BP and Shell are trying to become net zero by 2050, you kind of have to go, oh my God, how do you do that in a company that's emitting so much? So I think we're all kind of eager to see how that's going to play out. They're certainly going to have to buy a lot of RECs. They're not going to be able to decarbonize their business entirely. But I'm certainly encouraged by the fact that they've at least gotten the memo that that's important to their investors. And also really excited to see people like another company we've gotten to know is Maersk. So the big Danish shipping giant has a 2050 net zero low carbon goal. And, shipping fuels are some of the dirtiest fuels around. So they are looking for innovations, hydrogen and other ways to make their own shipping footprint less carbon intensive, but they're also making investments in technologies in the logistics and sort of overall transportation space as well. So I think we will get some really great support from independent sources and consultants who can help verify the ESG performance of these businesses.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Maria. How do you view the potential impact on climate change that other investor categories like private equity can have versus what you're doing in the VC space?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're, compared to maybe, all right, so let me back up. So the big, institutional investors, the big, the Black Rocks, the JP Morgan Chases, the banks, all of the different universities and some of the larger funds have already woken up to this, and they're starting to create very large scale instruments for their investors that are ESG focused and trying to address climate risk. I think they're very nervous. They're very concerned about the exposure that they have in their existing portfolios. So some of what they're creating is certainly to appeal to investors because, again, like I just mentioned, some of the big fossil fuel industries have heard from investors that they want some action on this. So sometimes you could accuse them of just marketing and creating these vehicles to attract investors. But in other cases, they're really trying to measure what risks they have in their existing portfolios so they know how to insure them better. And so they know which ones to invest in and which ones to dispose of. And so that at the very macro level, we're talking billions and billions of dollars, is really going to be using technologies that are helping them to make those decisions right away. And that also they're going to be investing in physical infrastructure. So, as I mentioned, some of these investments have been slowed down during COVID, but they're going to be buying big, portfolios of renewable assets and transmission assets and, efficient buildings and all that. So they're going to be bringing a lot of investment dollars into primarily physical assets. What I'm doing and what a lot of the venture folks are doing is to invest in those emerging businesses on a smaller scale that are really more technology driven, right? So what the big PE funds are doing are not so technology driven. It's more about scaling up existing solutions in the physical world. What we're investing in is much more around early stage businesses, emerging technologies, and in our case, digital technologies, but some of our peer funds are focused on, next generation battery science and other material science. So the earlier version of that and trying to make bets in areas that can have very big impact, but also that have the best chance of becoming economically viable and attractive to those large scale investors in the future.
Okay, next question is from Gail. Wondering if you aspire to support solutions that are not only resilient, but also resilient, yeah, but also fair trade, cognizant of workers' rights, human rights.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was looking for that question when you were reading. Would you just say it again? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
It says, wondering if, and this is Gail's question, she says, wondering if you aspire to support solutions that are not only resilient, but also fair trade, cognizant of workers' rights, human rights.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I think that is, again, like looking for folks that can help us measure that. So we know that the manufacturing process takes that into consideration. That is definitely something that we would be looking for. Mostly what we're investing in is software. And so it's not a physical, production or sourcing necessarily materials. That is the case in some areas where there are, sensors or other devices. But when you're thinking about maybe some of the rare earth materials that go into batteries and electric vehicles, that's not an area that we've been focused on, but I think is definitely something to be concerned about. I mean, we have a very strong commitment to diversity and inclusion in our portfolio. So not necessarily fair trade related, but we require that when we make an investment, our portfolio companies will also put in place a strategy for making their staff as well as their boards more diverse. So trying to have that the demographic effect as well in the company, as well as sort of the impact.
Okay, great, thank you. And to everybody that's asking questions, we have a lot of questions, so we're gonna try to get to as many of them as possible. Here's the next one from Jenna. Do you think there is a future in this country or globally with incentivizing blue carbon?
Oh, blue carbon. I don't know so much about blue carbon. I don't want to answer on that. That's not an area that I'm really well versed in. So let me politely decline. I don't want to say something stupid and pretend I know about it. I don't really know about it.
No, totally understandable. Okay, let's go to the next question. How can more sustainable solutions be integrated when customers' preference is at times located elsewhere?
Wow. So I think there's a couple of companies that we've seen that are trying to help people at the point of purchase. So what I went to with that question was customers who are making purchase decisions, so consumers. And that's what I'm sort of thinking about. And there's a number of ways. I'm really excited about a few of these companies that are coming about to create ways to measure the carbon impact of that purchase decision so that you can eventually spend your dollars and have impact with your dollars as well and keep track of your overall carbon footprint. And so there's a company that's in stealth. I'm not naming their name right now, but they're raising capital now. They're coming to address that from more of sort of a credit card standpoint, which I think is really intriguing. And a lot of this is being driven by young people. Like young people realize that they may not have a lot of money to invest in these funds. They can't get into these big, PE funds or bank funds, but they can make every dollar that they spend matter. So I think it's really exciting to see that young people are calling for this kind of information to guide some of their own consumption behavior. And if I didn't quite answer that question, Jenna, or I'm sorry, whoever that was, like if you meant other kinds of customers, then I'm happy to try again.
Okay. Okay, so if that didn't answer your question, you can mention it in the Q&A or the chat. Okay, so Cheryl has a question. Some wind and solar designs can kill wildlife. Have you looked into this area and solving this engineering issue?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's definitely a concern. So some of the rulemaking, so the Endangered Species Act is really, really important because that is a big way to force developers to comply with environmental oversight of those sites. And unfortunately, that has just been, the current administration is trying to weaken that. And so, yes, you definitely need good policy that will require consideration for whatever it is, folks in wetland, species in wetlands, bats, birds, other things. I think that, in my mind, the done properly, and certainly, the industry has evolved to the point where they are very good about understanding where to site these, wind farms and solar farms, to have the least amount of environmental, intrusion. And I think that that's also like why we need, federal government and state government oversight to be able to support the rulemaking, so that there is punishment for companies that don't do this properly. But I think otherwise, once you've done the best that you can, I know that there's still issues around wildlife in these locations. And I guess, the way I have come to peace with it is just that it is much better for the environment overall. And I think, if it helps to close down a certain number of coal plants that are contributing so dramatically, or maybe helps take offline aging nuclear plants, which have a much, much worse environmental threats, I think that it's one of those trades that you have to make.
Okay, next question is from Heidi. Can you speak more regarding how how did you develop the network to make the jump from founder side to the investor side and to raise the fund? And the next part is, and do you think we will see more equity dollars available for women and minority leaders? What strategies as both an investor and a fundraiser work best for you and to address bias?
Wow, that's a good one.
That's a loaded one.
There's like 3 questions in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think having been an entrepreneur makes me a better investor, because I am more sympathetic to what the CEO is going through, and probably know how to help them more directly. And am more aware of all of the operational challenges of running and growing a successful business. So it's an advantage to be an investor, having had some operational and entrepreneurial experience. So much, either whether you're raising a fund or you're running a business, so much of it is sales, and it's just a different kind of sales. So you have to, I always tell this to young people that are getting started, is to really get yourself some early experience where you have to be interfacing with the customer, and you have to either be selling to them, or you're working on sort of customer success, customer engagement, because understanding, how to deal with the customers, how to sell to the customers is such valuable experience. And that's really what I took away from, my entrepreneurial experience. And I use every day now with the fund. So, knowing how to talk to people, a lot of successful sales and fundraising is organization. So being very organized and following up and doing your homework and your research before you meet with somebody, so you know something about them and you can speak intelligently to them, is being a really, really good listener. So you can hear what the objections are. You can also hear and listen in a non-defensive way, to what they want or what they don't like about what you're selling. So I think that is, if you're going to be an entrepreneur or a fundraiser, if you're an entrepreneur, then you really need to listen to the customer. So you're making and selling something that they want. And if you're fundraising and you're really listening very carefully to someone, you also don't want to spend a lot of time trying to sell to somebody who isn't really a good fit for your fund. They're not going to invest. So you can't afford to spend a lot of cycles trying to convince somebody that isn't very likely going to want to invest. So all of those sort of soft skills around selling are really critical. And it's a pretty natural leap, from being an entrepreneur into being an investor. My path was through Clean Energy Trust. So that was, where I was working as running this accelerator and working alongside entrepreneurs. And we were doing investing there, even though it was at very small checks and it was this really early stage investing, we were doing that to support the businesses. So that was sort of my bridge into venture capital. So that was maybe answering the first part of her question. Where is her question in here? I'm trying to see.
Okay, I can ask you.
Heidi. That's Heidi. I know Heidi. I'm so sorry. I didn't see that was Heidi Lubin. She is a friend of mine. Hi, Heidi. Okay, so women and minorities. I mean, great to see you. I think that the Me Too movement has absolutely helped shine a spotlight on the lack of diversity in the investing world. and also in the energy world. I mean, there aren't too many female executives in the energy space or the climate space. Maybe more so in the environmental industry, but not so much in the energy space. So I think that, you know, it's really important to try to promote and develop people. That's always been a big focus area of mine, is that whenever I can support, you know, people of color, young women that are trying to get into the business, is just trying to help fill the pipeline always with more and more candidates is really, really important. And then, you know, as a fundraiser, we're hoping the fact that we have 2 of our partners are women, and we have this very strong commitment to diversity, we're hoping that that gives us an advantage in fundraising, that we will attract, you know, investors that care about that as well. And that will be a differentiator for us.
Okay, great. Okay, let's ask 3 more questions. Yes, we could be here all day, it seems like, with all the questions, which is good. Mark asked, as a woman in technology and investments, what have you been most challenged by, surprised by, and or frustrated by?
Well, a little bit, yeah, related to the last, you know, the last answer. I mean, I won't, I guess I think it's a little lonely that I don't have as many peers or friends that are women in the industry. So that, you know, I sort of feel like I kind of glom on to any women as soon as I can find them. Like any smart women that I find in the space, I want to be friends with, I want to know, you know, because there's so few of us. So I think it's probably been a little bit of like some of the loss of some of those friendships that probably men have had in the business. It's definitely a lot better, you know, today than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago when I was starting out in my career. And, you know, I love that there's now groups that are dedicated to supporting women in the investing world and the technology world. Like I'm, you know, joined All Raise. They're in the Bay Area. They're trying to really help elevate women investors. There's a great group that is helping senior women in the private equity world called PE Win, and you have to be a partner or higher level, and they're terrific. They have really, really great content. There are a number of different investors that want to invest in female funds, and so that's really positive. I just talked to one actually just before we got on, and they have a whole mandate around women first-time fund managers. You know, so recognizing that we need a little more help. We don't have the deep networks that, you know, a lot of men have in the space. And, you know, I think it's really challenging. I'll admit, you know, during COVID, when times are really hard and the economy and things are scary and the economy is difficult, investors want to rely upon the people that they know already. So they're less likely to take a chance and invest outside their network or with somebody new. They're going to stick to the folks that are already in their network. So, you know, it will probably be a little harder, you know, for women in diverse managers to get traction. But at least we know that there's a lot of folks that want to have an impact, and that maybe finding them and being, you know, matching up with them is a little easier than it was, you know, even with my first fund, you know, 5 years ago. So I think that it's getting a little bit better for sure. And there's a lot more new organizations that are trying to be helpful.
Great. Okay, I'm going to ask another question from Mark. I thought you asked some good questions here, Mark. What is a project that you've been a part of, or do you think has the biggest social, environmental, economic impact, and or are you the most proud of?
Wow. Well, I have to say I'm really proud of what we've done with Clean Energy Trust. You know, the organization is now over 10 years old. We've touched a lot of businesses, and ones that are very high impact, and ones that have would have had a really hard time getting started without some seed capital, some startup capital. So I think from an overall impact on the problem of climate change, as well as, you know, economically on jobs and to the region, I'm really proud of what we've done there, and it's still going. You know, it's not over yet, and the organization is evolving. And I think it's a great group, even for anyone in your community in Santa Cruz Works to know about. If you have a startup company, you know, I definitely would love for you to get in touch with Clean Energy Trust, because they work primarily in the Midwest, but they are also branching out to work in partnership with peer organizations, you know, all over the country. And they may be helpful. They may be helpful to you as well, to put you in touch with some of the big companies that could be customers, or some of the funding sources that we know of around the country. So that's probably the one I feel like you know, it's had touched a lot of people, touched a lot of companies. We've had some really great policy impact. We do a clean energy job study that's been very well regarded, so that we can show what kind of economic impact on the job sector the clean energy space has had. And so I think that it's a really fantastic organization. It's a nonprofit. So I'm really proud of all of their achievements.
Great. Okay, last question. Bear with me, it's kind of a long question here. So it's from Dagmar at the bottom. There's been a lot more focus on the three pillars of sustainability lately: planet, people, profit. People often interpret profit as greed rather than necessity to support the other two pillars. Have you come across a better way to express this third pillar so that it resonates better with the green community?
I totally agree with that. You know, the profit angle, I mean, that's kind of what, when you pose that question, right? Profit versus extinction. I feel really strongly we have to be working on solutions that are commercially viable. I mean, maybe one way to sort of position it differently is scalability. You know, what can really truly be scaled up? Like, you don't want to be working on a solution that is so expensive or requires so much government support that the business community will never really embrace it, or that it couldn't be deployed globally, you know, that it could only be deployed in an area where the government is supportive. So I think that that is a really big factor in why, you know, I have challenges with the kind of degrowth movement that is sort of thinks that we can kind of solve some of these problems by sort of suspending or, you know, maybe defunding a lot of these activities. I think that I'm a big fan of entrepreneurship, not only because of the potential it has to have a positive impact, but also because what it does for the economy. You know, these young companies are great job creators and wealth creators, and have lifted a lot of immigrants, you know, out of you know, poverty, and have helped also, you know, a lot of our great companies were started by folks that came here with very little, and other than, you know, human ingenuity and creativity and intelligence, and made, you know, enormous, you know, positive impacts, like Steve Jobs and others. So I think that entrepreneurship is an important, a really critical part of our culture and community here in the United States, but even around the world. And one other thing I wanted to say about scalability. Oh, so like some of the, you know, while I'm saying all that, I do think it's worth looking at some solutions that are, I don't think we have any real evidence of being commercially viable, but are probably really necessary at this stage of you know, the climate change, you know, crisis, and looking at carbon sequestration, knowing that right now, and I don't think ever any of these technologies have been financially very competitive, but we might need to deploy them with some level of support, whether it's philanthropic or government support, in order to make greater strides in removing carbon emissions from the atmosphere. But I look at something like that, but I also think there's opportunities to find innovative, scalable solutions. Like, one thing I've just read about is, you know, putting crushed up limestone in agricultural fields, because it captures carbon emissions in a natural way. And something like that is very scalable, right? Versus putting devices out that are very costly to try to suck carbon out of the air, or to capture it, you know, putting these devices into heavily polluting coal plants or gas plants as well, is not really that viable economically. But crushing up limestone and adding it to soil or fields is inexpensive and potentially very, very scalable. So like, you have to kind of come at always looking for that very scalable solution, something that could be deployed globally and have enormous impact and not be very expensive. That's just what you have to fit it into. So is that puzzle.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that's it. Thank you, Amy, for answering all those questions. You did amazing.
What an engaged audience you guys have. Thank you so much for all of everyone's attention, and for some friends that have turned up. Hi, Heidi. And also for just the passion that I can see. You know, people are very knowledgeable about the topic. If there's anything that I can do, you know, to be helpful to anyone's businesses, you know, Doug knows how to get in touch with me and can share my email address so that I can try to be helpful. Or if there's anybody who's just getting started or trying to move into this industry, be more than happy to point you in some of the the directions or to some of the resources that have been helpful to me. But what a great organization you guys have. And thank you so much for taking time to talk with me.
Yeah, thank you. And attendees, you asked some, like just you mentioned, some great questions. We got to almost all of them, but there was a few that we missed. So if we missed your questions, this video will actually be on our website in a few days, and you could post that question in the comments and we will try to get that answer for you. Okay, Doug, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Amy. That was just fantastic, very engaging. As Matthew mentioned, we will post this video tomorrow, the recording, and contact information for Buoyant as well. So again, thank you so much, Amy.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a wrap for us. I want to thank again all of our sponsors out there. Too many to name individually here, but again, thank you so much. And with that, we thank you for attending and see you next time.